They told me I would hunt heretics. Instead, I became one. My name is Curtis Voss, and I used to believe the Emperor protected the faithful. I learned the truth too late. The Inquisition does not save souls, it devours them, and I was foolish enough to offer mine willingly. I was nothing special before they found me. Just another soldier in the Planetary Defense Force on Hive World Secundus, a sprawling city of metal and smoke where 30 billion people lived stacked on top of each other like rats in a cage. I carried a laser gun whose power pack drained dead after every third engagement. I wore flak armor held together with prayer and duct tape. I spent my days patrolling the lower hab levels where the air tasted like rust and human waste, breaking up fights between gangers who would kill you for a sleeve of corpse starch rations. It was during the Vermilion Uprising that everything changed. A chaos cult had been growing in the Underhive for months, spreading like cancer through the industrial sectors. By the time our officers realized what was happening, the cultists had already converted thousands of workers to their blasphemous cause. They painted symbols on the factory walls in human blood. They chanted names that made your ears bleed if you listened too long. They promised freedom from the Emperor's tyranny and endless pleasures in service to their dark gods. My squad was sent to clear out a habitation complex where the cultists had barricaded themselves inside with civilian hostages. We breached the main entrance at dawn, moving through corridors lit only by flickering emergency lights. The walls were covered in writing I could not read, symbols that seemed to move when you looked away from them. The air felt wrong, thick and warm like breathing through wet cloth. That is when I heard the screaming. We found them in the central worship hall, 50 civilians tied to metal posts while cultists in tattered robes danced around them with knives and ceremonial brands. The leader stood on a makeshift altar, a man whose face had been peeled away to reveal muscle and bone beneath. He was speaking in a language that was not a language, sounds that made your skull ache and your vision blur. My squad sergeant, a veteran named Corvus who had served for 20 years, dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. He started laughing, a high-pitched sound that did not belong in a human throat. Then he turned his laser gun on the soldier next to him and fired until there was nothing left but smoking meat and shattered armor. 3 more of my squad mates went mad in the next 30 seconds. They tore at their own faces. They screamed about the truth behind the stars. One of them tried to carve the cult symbols into his chest with his combat knife before bleeding out on the floor. I should have broken like they did. Every other soldier in that room either went insane or died trying to stop the ones who had. But something in my head stayed quiet when it should have, been screaming. The cultist leader pointed at me with a finger that had too many joints and spoke a word that should have torn my mind apart. I felt it pressing against my thoughts like a physical thing trying to crack me open and pour madness inside. I raised my laser gun and shot him in the face. The spell or curse or whatever unholy thing he had been casting fell apart like smoke. The other cultists hesitated for just a moment, confused that their magic had failed. That moment was enough. I killed 4 of them before they remembered they had weapons. The few remaining civilians who could still move broke free and helped me finish the rest. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found me sitting in a pool of blood that was not entirely my own, surrounded by bodies wearing the uniforms of my former squad mates. I was the only soldier from my unit who walked out of that building with my mind intact, the only one who had heard the words of chaos and remained loyal to the Emperor. That is when I met Inquisitor Mordecai. He arrived on Secundus 3 days after the uprising was finally crushed, descending from orbit in a black shuttle that bore the seal of the Holy Ordos. He was a tall man wrapped in a coat made from some leather I did not recognize, his face hidden behind a silver mask sculpted to look like a skull. When he spoke, his voice came through Vox speakers built into the mask, cold and emotionless as a servitor's mechanical drone. He reviewed the reports from the Vermilion Uprising personally, reading through casualty lists and incident summaries with the focused attention of a scholar studying ancient texts. Then he came to find me in the Medici ward where I was recovering from minor injuries and major psychological evaluation. The evaluators had been confused by my test results. Every other survivor from the cult uprising showed signs of trauma, corruption, or both. But my readings came back clean. No taint, no instability, no weakness that chaos could exploit. The Medici priests could not explain it, so they kept running the same tests over and over, hoping to find something they had missed. Mordecai dismissed the evaluators with a wave of his hand and sat down on the edge of my bed without asking permission. He studied me through the eye holes in his mask for a long time before speaking. "You resisted," he said finally. "When trained Astartes have fallen to less, you resisted. Do you know why?" I told him I did not know. I told him the truth, that I had been terrified and confused and just wanted to survive. I had not done anything special. I had not been brave. I had simply pulled a trigger when something threatened to destroy my mind. "Humility," Mordecai said. "Good. The proud ones always fall fastest. They think their faith makes them strong, but faith is not enough. You need something deeper, something harder." He leaned closer, and I could smell chemical preservatives coming from behind his mask. "You have a gift, Curtis Voss, a natural resistance to the warp's influence that cannot be taught or trained. Vanishingly rare, perhaps one soul in 10 million shows this kind of resistance. Fewer still can ever be shaped into a weapon worth keeping." He told me he was recruiting. He told me the Imperium had enemies that could not be fought with lasguns and prayer alone. He told me about the Inquisition, about the men and women who hunted heretics and Xenos and demons in the Emperor's name. He told me I could be one of them if I was strong enough to bear the burden. I should have said no. I should have told him I was just a soldier who wanted to serve out my time and maybe earn a pension if I lived long enough. But I was young and stupid and desperate to believe my life meant something more than patrolling hab corridors until a stray bullet or falling debris ended my existence. I said yes. "Emperor, forgive me," I said yes. The training began immediately. Mordecai took me from Secundus that same night, loading me onto his ship along with 3 other recruits he had collected from various war zones across the sector. There was Valen, a tech priest who had survived a daemon incursion in his forge temple by shutting down his emotional augmetics and thinking in pure logic. There was Joachim, a young man with pale eyes and trembling hands who could sense lies and hidden thoughts. A psyker weak enough to avoid being fed to the Emperor, but strong enough to be useful. And there was Lyra, a woman 10 years older than me who had washed out of Assassinorum candidate training at the Schola Progenium. By all rights, she should have been quietly terminated, but Mordecai had called in favors and claimed her as his own. We lived on Mordecai's ship, a converted merchant vessel called the Eternal Vigilance that smelled like recycled air and weapon oil. We trained for 16 hours every day. We learned to detect signs of corruption in speech patterns and body language. We learned to resist psychic influence through mental exercises that felt like forcing your brain to run backward. We learned to handle weapons that could kill with a single shot or disable without leaving marks. We learned that mercy was weakness and doubt was heresy, and the only truth that mattered was the Emperor's will as interpreted by those wise enough to understand it. I excelled at the training. My natural resistance to warp influence made the psychic conditioning exercises easier than they were for the others. I could walk through rooms filled with cursed artifacts without feeling the pull of corruption. I could interrogate cultists without being swayed by their honeyed lies about freedom and enlightenment. Mordecai told me I had potential. He told me I could go far in the Inquisition if I remained faithful and obedient. I believed him. I believed every word. Our first mission came 6 months into training. A Genestealer cult had been discovered on a mining colony in the Hadron Belt, hidden among the workers who extracted promethium from asteroids to fuel the sector's war machine. The cult had been there for generations, waiting for their alien gods to arrive from the stars and deliver them from Imperial rule. They were days away from fully activating their psychic beacon. Inquisitorial auguries showed a splinter fleet already closing on the system, drawn by decades of cult whispers in the warp. We infiltrated the mining complex disguised as new workers, our equipment hidden in cargo containers marked for routine maintenance. It took us 2 weeks to identify the cult's leadership and map out their underground meeting chambers. Lyra taught me how to move through crowds without being noticed, how to ask questions without seeming curious, how to make people trust you right before you betrayed them. The assault happened during the night cycle when most of the complex was asleep. We hit them hard and fast, Mordecai leading from the front with a power sword that burned with blue fire. The Genestealers were there, 4 armed horrors that moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. But we had planned for them. Valen's modified plasma weapon turned 2 of them into superheated vapor. Joachim used his psychic abilities to confuse the third long enough for Lyra to put a bolt round through its brain. I killed the 4th one myself, emptying an entire magazine of blessed ammunition into its chest until it stopped twitching. The cultists died next. Some fought. Most begged. A few tried to run, but there was nowhere to run to on an asteroid mining station floating in the void. We killed them all. Men, women, the elderly, and the infected children who had already started growing the extra arms that marked them as hybrid abominations. We cleansed the entire complex with fire and explosive charges, turning it into a drifting tomb that would serve as a warning to anyone else who thought rebellion was preferable to imperial rule. When it was over, I stood in the shuttle bay and watched the mining complex break apart through the viewport. Fires burned in the vacuum for a few seconds before the oxygen ran out and everything went dark. 3,000 people had lived there yesterday. Today there was nothing but debris and frozen corpses spiraling away into the asteroid field. I felt proud. I felt like I had done something important, something that mattered. I had struck a blow against the enemies of mankind. I had served the Emperor with distinction. Mordecai himself congratulated me on my performance, told me I had the makings of a true Inquisitor if I continued to prove myself worthy. That night I slept better than I had in months. I dreamed of wearing Mordecai's silver mask, of commanding my own ship and my own team of acolytes. I dreamed of hunting heretics across 1,000 worlds and bringing the Emperor's justice to those who deserved it. I dreamed of glory and purpose and a life that meant something beyond mere survival. I did not know, yet, that I was already damned. I did not know that the Inquisition does not hunt monsters, it creates them. I did not know that every word of praise was another link in the chains they were wrapping around my soul. But I would learn. Emperor, help me, I would learn. The mission to Talmar should have been simple. It was supposed to be another investigation, another chance to prove my worth to the Inquisition. Instead, it became the moment I started to understand what I had truly joined. Talmar was an agri-world, one of thousands scattered across the Imperium that existed only to grow food for the endless war machine. Its surface was covered in grain fields that stretched to the horizon, interrupted only by processing facilities and the sprawling estates of the noble families who controlled the harvest quotas. The population was 12 billion, most of them indentured workers who spent their entire lives bent over crops under a sun that bleached everything the same pale yellow. We arrived in response to reports of chaos cult activity among the worker population. Anonymous tips had been sent to the local Arbites about strange symbols appearing in the grain fields, about workers who disappeared during the night shifts and returned changed, about whispered prayers to gods whose names should never be spoken. The planetary governor, a man named Erasmus Corval, had requested inquisitorial assistance to investigate before the corruption spread beyond control. Mordecai did not trust the request. He never trusted anything that came gift-wrapped with a bow on top. We spent 2 weeks investigating in secret, moving through the worker habs disguised as quality inspectors from the administratum. Valen scanned for technological signs of corruption. Joachim probed the surface thoughts of suspected cultists. Lyra followed people through the shadows and reported on their activities. I did what I had been trained to do, asking questions and watching for the small tells that marked someone as a liar or a heretic. What we found was not a chaos cult. What we found was a labor organization. The workers had been meeting in secret to discuss better conditions, safer working hours, fair compensation for injuries sustained in the processing facilities. They had been using code words and hidden symbols because forming unions was illegal under Imperial law, punishable by servitor conversion or worse. They were not praying to chaos gods. They were praying to the Emperor to deliver them from lives that ground them into dust before they reached 30 years old. But we also found something else. Governor Corval himself bore the marks of true corruption. Joachim sensed it first during a formal dinner at the Planetary Palace, a wrongness in the governor's thoughts that felt like touching something that should not exist. Valen confirmed it by scanning the palace and detecting machinery that operated on principles banned by the Mechanicus for 10,000 years. I saw the evidence with my own eyes when we broke into his private chambers and found a shrine to the ruinous powers hidden behind a false wall, complete with ritual implements and a book bound in human skin. Corval was the heretic. The workers were innocent. The investigation was over. We had found our target. I thought we would arrest him. I thought there would be a trial, evidence presented before officials, a proper execution carried out according to Imperial law. I had seen Mordecai be thorough before, documenting everything, building cases that could withstand scrutiny from other inquisitors who might question his methods. Instead, Mordecai ordered immediate execution. No trial, no presentation of evidence, no chance for Corval to speak in his own defense or even understand what he was being accused of. Just a bolt round through the skull while he sat at his breakfast table, his brain matter spraying across a plate of imported fruit that cost more than most workers earned in a year. Then Mordecai ordered the purge of Corval's entire bloodline. His wife, who had never entered the private shrine. His 3 sons, the oldest barely 15 years old. His 2 daughters, one of them still in diapers. His elderly mother, who lived in a separate wing of the palace and probably had not spoken to her son in years. His cousins and nephews and nieces, distant relatives who had never set foot in the palace at all. Lyra carried out most of the executions personally. She moved through the palace like a machine, putting bolt rounds into skulls with the same efficiency she used to clean her weapons. Some of them ran. Some of them begged. The children cried for parents who were already dead. It did not matter. Lyra killed them all while I stood in the hallway outside and listened to the gunshots echo through the marble corridors. I did not participate. Mordecai had not ordered me to, but I did not stop it either. I just stood there and counted the shots. 13 in total. 13 people dead because their blood relative had been corrupted by chaos. 13 people who would never know why they died or what crime they had supposedly committed. When it was over, Lyra walked past me with blood splattered across her body armor. She did not look at me. She did not say anything. She just kept walking toward the shuttle bay like she had completed a routine maintenance task. That night, Valen came to my quarters. The tech priest rarely spoke unless he had something technical to report, but this time he sat down on the edge of my bunk without asking permission. His augmetic eyes whirred and clicked as they focused on my face. "The children," he said quietly. "They bore no signs of corruption. My scans were conclusive. They were innocent of heresy." I told him I knew. I told him I had seen their faces. I told him I did not understand why Mordecai had ordered their deaths when they posed no threat to anyone. "The Inquisitor believes corruption can be inherited," Valen replied. "He believes the taint passes through blood as surely as it passes through belief. He considers the bloodline purge to be preventative action rather than punishment." I asked Valen if he believed that. If his logic processors and data analysis truly supported the idea that you could inherit heresy like you inherited eye color or height. The tech priest was quiet for a long time. His augmetics hummed and clicked as he processed the question. "No," he said finally. "The data does not support that conclusion. But questioning the Inquisitor's methods would itself be heresy. So I remained silent and performed my duties." He left after that. I sat in the darkness of my quarters and tried to convince myself that Mordecai knew things I did not, that his centuries of experience meant he understood threats I could not see. I tried to believe that the deaths had been necessary, that the Emperor's work required hard choices and bloody hands. I almost succeeded. 3 days later, Valen disappeared. He had been scheduled for morning prayers and weapons maintenance, but he never arrived. Lyra reported him missing. We searched the ship from bow to stern, checking every compartment and storage bay. Joachim tried to locate him psychically, but found nothing. It was Mordecai himself who told me what had happened. Valen had been caught sending unauthorized transmissions off the ship, communications that questioned the methods used during the Talmar mission. He had been sharing doubts with other tech priests in his former forged temple, asking theological questions about the morality of bloodline purges and the limits of inquisitorial authority. He was becoming compromised, Mordecai said, his voice flat and emotionless through his skull-mask speakers. Doubt is the first step toward corruption. I removed him before the rot could spread. I asked where Valen was. I asked if he had been imprisoned, if there would be a hearing, if he could defend himself against the accusations. Mordecai walked me to the ship's recycling center. There, laid out on a sorting table, were Valen's augmetic components. His mechanical eyes, his servo arms, his respiratory augmentation, his neural processing unit. All of them had been carefully removed and cleaned, ready to be repurposed for other servants of the Mechanicus. The organic components had already been fed into the protein reclaimers like any other failed crewman. Whatever rights the Mechanicus might have preferred, Mordecai's word outweighed Martian tradition aboard the Eternal Vigilance. Valen had not been imprisoned. He had not received a hearing. He had been quietly killed and disposed of, and the only reason Mordecai showed me the remains was to make sure I understood the lesson. I vomited into a waste reclamation bin. I could not stop myself. The thought of eating food that might contain pieces of my former colleague, the casual efficiency with which Mordecai had eliminated someone who had been part of our team for months, it broke something inside me that I had not known could break. "Control yourself," Mordecai said coldly. Valen failed because he allowed sentiment to override duty. Do not make the same mistake. After that, everything changed. I started watching Joachim more carefully. The young psyker had always been nervous, his hands constantly trembling from the effort of controlling his gifts. But now, he seemed terrified. He flinched whenever Mordecai entered a room. He avoided making eye contact with anyone. During meals, he barely ate, just pushed food around his plate while staring at nothing. I found him one night in the observation deck, pressed against the viewport and staring out at the stars. Tears ran down his face, catching the light from distant suns. "I can hear them," he whispered when I approached. "The voices from the warp. They have been getting louder ever since Talmar. They whisper things to me, terrible things, true things. They tell me what Mordecai is planning. They tell me about the missions to come and the people who will die and the innocents who will be sacrificed in the Emperor's name." I put my hand on his shoulder, trying to offer comfort. His skin was burning hot through his robes, fever heat that should not have been possible in a living human. "Please," Joachim said, turning to look at me with eyes that had started to change color, shifting from pale blue to something darker and wronger. "Please help me. I can feel it taking hold. I have tried to resist, but I am not strong enough. The voices promise peace if I just stop fighting. They promise an end to the fear and the doubt and the horror of what we do." I told him I would talk to Mordecai. I told him the Inquisitor would know what to do, that there were treatments for psychers who struggled with warp exposure. I told him everything would be fine. I was lying. We both knew it. Mordecai came to the observation deck within the hour. He had probably been watching through security monitors, waiting to see if I would handle the situation correctly. He entered with his bolt pistol already drawn, the weapon held steady as he approached Joachim's trembling form. "You have been compromised," Mordecai said simply. "There is only one mercy the Inquisition grants to those who fall." Joachim did not beg. He just closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to the Emperor, asking forgiveness for his weakness. Mordecai shot him in the head. The bolt round detonated inside Joachim's skull, turning his brain into vapor and fragments of bone. His body collapsed against the viewport, leaving a smear of blood and other fluids on the transparent surface. I stood there and watched it happen. I did not move. I did not speak. I had learned my lesson about questioning Mordecai's decisions. "Clean this up," Mordecai told me, gesturing at Joachim's corpse with his bolt pistol. "And remember what you have seen here. Mercy is heresy. Doubt is weakness. The Emperor's work requires absolute faith and absolute obedience. If you cannot provide both, you are no use to the Inquisition." He left me alone with the body. I spent 3 hours scrubbing blood off the viewport and hauling Joachim's remains to the recycling center. His augmetic components were fewer than Valen's had been. Just a psychic hood and some neural stabilizers. Everything else was organic, ready to be broken down into base elements and repurposed. I thought about the children on Talmar while I worked. I thought about Valen questioning orders that made no sense. I thought about Joachim begging for help that would never come. I started to understand that the Inquisition did not hunt heretics to protect the innocent. It hunted heretics to feed its own appetite for violence and control. 2 new acolytes joined us within the week. A psyker named Marius who kept his thoughts locked down tight behind mental barriers. An investigator named Kale who asked no questions and followed every order without hesitation. They were replacements, fresh meat to fill the gaps left by the ones who had failed Mordecai's standards. Neither of them questioned anything. Neither of them showed doubt or mercy or any of the human weaknesses that had gotten Valen and Joachim killed. They were perfect little servants, exactly what Mordecai wanted. And I realized with growing horror that I was being watched more carefully now. Lyra followed me through the ship, always staying just far enough back that she could claim it was coincidence. Mordecai asked me pointed questions during debriefings, testing whether I harbored doubts about our methods. The new acolytes studied me like I was a specimen under glass, waiting to see if I would crack. I had been marked, not as a heretic, not yet, but as someone who had seen too much and might be weak enough to question it. I was corruption adjacent, tainted by association with those who had failed. Every action I took was now evaluated not for its effectiveness, but for what it revealed about my loyalty. The next mission came faster than I expected. A hive world called Morthus Prime, where reports indicated a chaos cult operating among the upper spire nobility. We deployed with our new team configuration, Marius and Kale slotting into the roles that Valen and Joachim had once filled. The investigation took 4 weeks. We infiltrated high society events, bribed servants for information, intercepted communications between suspected cultists. What we found was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of planetary government. Nobles who had been corrupted by promises of power and immortality. Officials who had been turned by threats against their families. Military officers who had been seduced by visions of victory over the Imperium's enemies. It was real. It was dangerous. It needed to be stopped before the corruption spread further. But when Mordecai gave the order to purge the infected, he did not stop with the actual cultists. An entire hab block was marked for extermination. 50,000 people living in 300 levels of residential units. The reasoning was simple in Mordecai's mind. The cult had been recruiting from the population. Some of those residents were probably corrupted, even if we could not prove it. Better to eliminate the entire area than risk letting corrupted individuals escape into the wider hive. I watched from the observation deck of a hovering gunship as orbital bombardment turned the hab block into molten slag. 50,000 people died in 18 seconds. The lucky ones never knew what hit them. The unlucky ones had time to run toward exits that had been sealed by Arbite's units following Mordecai's orders. I thought about the children in that block, the elderly, the workers who had just come off their shifts and wanted to sleep, the families eating dinner together, the teenagers dreaming about futures they would never see. All of them dead because they happened to live near people who had been corrupted by chaos. This was not justice. This was not the Emperor's work. This was murder on a scale that made me sick to think about. And I had been part of it. I had helped with the investigation that identified the hab block. I had provided intelligence that made the bombardment possible. I had become exactly what I swore I would never be. That night I sat in my quarters and tried to pray. I tried to ask the Emperor for guidance, for some sign that what we were doing was right and necessary. But the words would not come. They stuck in my throat like broken glass, cutting me from the inside. Lyra found me there an hour later. She stood in my doorway and watched me with eyes that showed no emotion at all. "Mordecai wants to see you," she said. "He has concerns about your performance during the Morthus operation. He wants to discuss your future with the Inquisition." I followed her to Mordecai's chambers, knowing that this conversation would determine whether I lived or died. I had seen too much. I had questioned too much. I was no longer the faithful acolyte who had said yes on Hive World Secundus all those months ago. I had become a liability, and the Inquisition did not tolerate liabilities. Mordecai sat behind a desk made from wood harvested from a world that no longer existed, its surface polished to a mirror shine. His skull mask reflected the candlelight that illuminated his private chambers, making it seem like the face itself was on fire. He did not invite me to sit. He just watched me stand at attention while seconds stretched into minutes. "You hesitated during the Morthus operation," he said finally. His mechanical voice carried no inflection, no emotion, just flat statement of fact. "When I gave the order to seal the hab block exits, you stood frozen for 4.7 seconds before transmitting my commands to the Arbite's units. 4.7 seconds during which corrupted individuals could have escaped into the wider population. I told him I had been confirming the order. I told him I wanted to make sure I had heard correctly before condemning 50,000 people to death. The lie tasted like ashes in my mouth. "You were doubting," Mordecai replied. "Doubt is the gateway through which corruption enters the faithful. I have seen it happen to better servants than you. First they question a single order. Then they question the methods. Then they question the mission itself. By the time they realize they have fallen, it is already too late." He stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of me. Even without his armor, he was taller than me by half a foot. The smell of chemical preservatives was stronger this close, mixing with incense that burned in brass censers hanging from the ceiling. "I recruited you because you were resistant to corruption," he continued. "But resistance is not immunity. You can still fall if you allow weakness into your heart. Valen fell because he valued logic over faith. Joachim fell because he valued compassion over duty. I will not allow you to fall because you value innocence over necessity." I asked him what he wanted from me. I asked him how I could prove my loyalty if every action was now seen through the lens of suspicion. "By obeying without question," Mordecai said. "By accepting that the Inquisition's methods are beyond your understanding. By trusting that every death I order serves a greater purpose even if you cannot see it. Can you do that, Curtis Voss? Can you be the weapon I need you to be?" I said yes. What else could I say? No would have meant a bolt round through my skull and my remains fed into the recyclers alongside Valen and Joachim. So I lied to the Inquisitor's face and told him I understood, that I would be more faithful, that I would never hesitate again. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Because our next mission will test that faith more than anything you have faced before. We are going to Salvation's End, a shrine world where a refugee convoy has been sheltering in violation of Imperial quarantine protocols. The convoy may contain individuals exposed to genestealer infection. The entire population must be screened and purged if necessary. Salvation's End was a beautiful world, one of the few places in the Imperium that had been spared the worst of humanity's industrial hunger. Its surface was covered in forests and oceans, interrupted only by the massive cathedrals that housed millions of pilgrims who came to walk the sacred paths, where Saint Marguerite had supposedly received visions from the Emperor himself. The refugee convoy had landed there 6 months ago, fleeing from a genestealer uprising on their homeworld. They had been promised sanctuary by the planetary authorities, protection while they waited for transport to resettlement worlds deeper in Imperial space. Instead, they got us. We arrived in the middle of the night cycle, deploying directly to the refugee encampment without warning or announcement. 3,000 people lived there in temporary shelters, families who had lost everything when their world fell to alien corruption. They had children who played in the dirt between tents. They had elderly who sat outside and told stories about homes they would never see again. They had people who prayed every day for the Emperor to deliver them from their suffering. Mordecai's orders were simple. Screen every individual for signs of genestealer infection. Anyone who showed the slightest hint of genetic corruption would be executed immediately. Anyone who resisted screening would be assumed corrupted and executed. Anyone who tried to flee would be executed. The entire process would be completed within 24 hours. I was assigned to Screening Station 7, working alongside Marius the Psyker and a Medici team from the local Arbites. We processed refugees one at a time, scanning them for genetic abnormalities, checking their blood for Xenos markers, having Marius probe their surface thoughts for signs of alien influence. Most of them passed. Most of them were clean, just normal humans who had been unlucky enough to live on a world that fell to the Tyranids. But some failed the screening. A man whose left arm showed signs of extra-joint development. A woman whose DNA contained markers that suggested third-generation hybrid ancestry. A child whose eyes had pupils that were slightly the wrong shape, barely noticeable unless you looked closely, but enough to mark him as potentially corrupted. The man begged us to understand that his arm deformity was from a childhood accident, that he had been born on a different world entirely, and only moved to the genestealer-infected planet as an adult. The woman swore she had never known her grandparents, had no idea if they had been infected or not. The child's mother screamed that her son was pure, that the eye abnormality was a genetic condition that ran in their family for generations. It did not matter. Mordecai's orders were absolute. Anyone who failed screening died. I watched Lyra put bolt rounds through their heads, watched their bodies dragged away to be burned in mass cremation pits dug by servitors. I counted each execution. 47 people died at my screening station alone over the course of that first day. The second day was worse. Word had spread through the refugee camp about what was happening at the screening stations. People tried to run. They hid in the forest surrounding the encampment, buried themselves in supply crates, disguised themselves among groups that had already been cleared. The Arbites hunted them down with dogs and auspex scanners. Every person caught trying to avoid screening was executed without being screened at all, their attempt to flee taken as proof of corruption. I saw a family of 4 gunned down while trying to reach a transport ship. Parents and 2 daughters, the youngest maybe 6 years old. They had passed screening the day before. They had been cleared as clean. But they made the mistake of trying to leave anyway, frightened by the violence and death surrounding them. The Arbites cut them down with automatic weapons fire, their bodies left in the dirt as a warning to anyone else who thought about running. That night I found Lyra cleaning her weapons in the armory. She worked with mechanical precision, disassembling her bolt pistol and wiping down each component with sacred oils. She had personally killed over 200 people in the past 48 hours. Her face showed no emotion at all. I asked her if she ever felt anything when she pulled the trigger, if she ever wondered whether the people she killed deserved to die. "Deserving has nothing to do with it," Lyra replied without looking up from her work. "Mordecai gives orders. I follow them. That is the only thing that matters in the Inquisition. The moment you start deciding who deserves what, you have already failed." I asked her about the family, the one that had been cleared but tried to leave anyway. The little girl with braided hair who had been carrying a stuffed toy when the bullets hit her. Lyra finally looked at me. Her eyes were empty, hollow things that reflected light but contained no life behind them. "They ran. Running implies guilt. Guilt requires punishment. It is very simple mathematics." Simple mathematics. That was what she called the murder of innocence. I wanted to grab her by the throat and force her to see what she had become, to make her understand that we were the monsters now, that every heretic we claimed to hunt was less corrupted than what we had turned into. But I did not. I just nodded and left the armory, my hands shaking with rage I could not express. The breaking point came on the third day. We were screening the final group of refugees, families who had been hiding in the cathedral where they thought the sanctity of the ground would protect them. Among them was a priest, an old man named Father Gregorius, who had served the ecclesiarchy for 60 years. He wore the robes of his office and carried a copy of the Imperial Creed bound in leather worn soft from decades of handling. Father Gregorius had been sheltering refugees in his cathedral since they arrived on Salvation's End. He had given them food from the church stores. He had led them in prayer. He had promised them that the emperor would protect the faithful and punish the wicked. He believed in the Imperium with a faith so pure it hurt to look at. When his turn came for screening, the genetic scan came back with an anomaly. His DNA contained markers that suggested possible exposure to genestealer genetic material, though the pattern was weak and could have been a false positive from the aging scanning equipment. Marius probed his thoughts and found nothing but devotion to the emperor and concern for his flock. Every test we ran said he was clean except for one single genetic marker that might have been nothing. Mordecai ordered his execution anyway. Better to kill a possibly innocent priest than risk letting a genestealer hybrid escape into the general population. The math was simple. One life weighed against potential millions if the infection spread. Father Gregorius did not beg when Lyra raised her bolt pistol. He just closed his eyes and began to pray, his voice steady and clear as he recited verses about the emperor's mercy and the redemption of the faithful. He was still praying when the bolt round entered his skull. The refugees who had been sheltering in his cathedral saw it happen. They saw a man who had fed them and protected them and led them in prayer get executed for a crime he did not commit based on evidence that was questionable at best. They started to panic, pushing toward the exits, trying to get away from the screening station before they met the same fate. The Arbites opened fire, not with laser guns set to stun, not with warning shots, with full automatic fire aimed at center mass. I watched refugees cut down as they ran, their bodies piling up against the cathedral doors they were trying to escape through. I watched children trampled in the stampede, their small forms crushed under the boots of adults desperate to survive. I watched the marble floors of a holy place turn red with the blood of people who had done nothing wrong except be afraid, and I snapped. I drew my last pistol and aimed it at the Arbite sergeant who was directing the massacre. My finger tightened on the trigger, one shot, one dead enforcer. It would not stop the killing, but it would mean something. It would mean I had chosen a side and it was not the Inquisition's. A hand caught my wrist before I could fire. Lyra stood beside me, her grip like iron as she forced my arm down. "Do not," she said quietly. "Whatever you are thinking, do not do it." I tried to pull away, but she was stronger than me. her assassin training giving her leverage I could not break. "They are innocents," I hissed. "They are killing innocents, and we are just standing here watching it happen." "They ran," Lyra replied with that same empty tone she had used in the armory. "Running implies guilt. You know the protocols as well as I do." I told her the protocols were wrong. I told her we had become exactly what we claimed to fight against. I told her that if the Emperor could see what we were doing in his name, he would weep. Lyra released my wrist and stepped back. "You need to report to Mordecai immediately. You have been compromised. You are no longer fit for duty." She was going to tell him. She was going to report my moment of weakness, and Mordecai would have me killed just like he killed Valen and Joachim. I could see my death reflected in her empty eyes, could feel the countdown beginning until a bolt round ended my existence. But before that happened, I had one more chance to do something right. One more chance to save at least some of the innocents who were dying for crimes they did not commit. That night I accessed the mission planning database on the Eternal Vigilance. I found the convoy schedules, the transport manifests, the screening results for every refugee who had been processed. And I found something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The genetic markers that had flagged Father Gregorius and dozens of others as potentially infected were false positives. The scanning equipment had been miscalibrated, its parameters set too sensitive by a factor of 3. Every person executed based on genetic screening had died because of faulty equipment and inquisitorial paranoia, not because they were actually corrupted. I copied the data to a secure data slate and prepared a transmission to send to the planetary authorities. If they knew the truth, if they understood that hundreds of innocents had been murdered based on bad data, maybe they could stop the madness before more people died. Maybe they could demand accountability from an Inquisition that answered to no one. I should have known better. I should have realized that Lyra was already watching me, that every action I took was being monitored and reported. I should have understood that the Inquisition had contingencies for acolytes who broke faith with their mission. The transmission never sent. Mordecai's tech priests blocked it before it reached the communications array. And when I returned to my quarters after my shift, I found the Inquisitor himself waiting for me, flanked by Lyra and 4 armed Arbites in full combat gear. "You attempted to send classified information to unauthorized recipients," Mordecai said, his mechanical voice somehow conveying disappointment despite its flat, emotionless tone. "You attempted to undermine an active inquisitorial operation. You have demonstrated sympathy for potential heretics over loyalty to the Imperium. There is only one conclusion to draw from these actions." I did not try to deny it. What would be the point? The evidence was clear. I had betrayed the Inquisition. I had chosen the lives of refugees over my duty to Mordecai. I had committed the ultimate sin of caring more about innocence than obedience. "I am not a heretic," I said quietly. "I am just someone who finally realized what we really are. We are not the Emperor's justice. We are his curse. We are the thing that makes humanity worth destroying." Mordecai stood and walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps. "You are correct," he said. "You are not a heretic, not yet, but you are corrupted. Not by chaos or Xenos influence, but by the most dangerous weakness of all. You have remained human, and humanity has no place in the Inquisition." He gestured to the Arbites. "Take him to the detention cells, prepare him for trial and execution. Make sure the other acolytes understand what happens to those who allow sentiment to override duty." The Arbites grabbed my arms and began dragging me from the room. I did not fight. There was no point. I had known this would happen from the moment I tried to send that transmission. I had chosen my path and accepted the consequences. But as they pulled me through the doorway, I looked back at Mordecai one final time. "How many?" I asked. "How many innocents have died following your orders? How many children? How many faithful servants of the Emperor who deserve better than what you gave them?" Mordecai tilted his skull mask. the gesture somehow conveying consideration. "I stopped counting after the first million," he said. "The numbers ceased to matter. There is only the mission, only the war against corruption, only the eternal vigilance that keeps humanity from falling into the darkness." He turned away from me, dismissing me as already dead. "Dispose of him within the week, and send word to our recruiting stations that we need a new acolyte, someone younger, someone more faithful, someone who understands what it means to serve." The cell they threw me in was 3 meters by 3 meters, carved from bare metal with no furniture except a bucket in the corner. The door was solid plasteel with a viewing slot that guards could use to check on me. There was no natural light, just a flickering fluorescent bulb that made everything look diseased and wrong. I sat in that cell for 3 days. No one came to see me except guards who pushed nutrient paste through a slot in the door twice a day. No one spoke to me. No one explained what would happen next. I just sat in the darkness and waited for the end that I knew was coming. On the 3rd day, the door opened and Mordecai entered alone. He carried a data slate and what looked like an execution warrant bearing official Inquisitorial seals. "Your trial has been completed," he said. "You have been found guilty of betraying the Inquisition, of attempting to undermine an active operation, and of demonstrating sympathy toward potential enemies of the Imperium. The sentence is death by psychic flaying, to be carried out immediately by our new sanctioned psyker. Your remains will be disposed of and your name will be stricken from all records. You will be forgotten as if you never existed." He paused, studying me with whatever eyes lay behind that skull mask. "Do you have any final words? Any prayers you wish to offer before sentence is carried out?" I looked up at the man who had recruited me, who had promised me purpose and glory and a chance to serve something greater than myself. The man who had turned me into a monster and then condemned me for finally refusing to be one. "I hope you remember me," I said. "I hope when you close your eyes you see all of our faces. Valen and Joachim and Father Gregorius and the little girl with the braided hair. I hope we haunt you for whatever counts as eternity in your mechanical existence. And I hope someday you understand what you have become." Mordecai said nothing. He just turned and walked out of the cell, leaving me alone with the guards who had come to take me to my execution. They dragged me to a chamber I had never seen before, deep in the bowels of the eternal vigilance, where the hull groaned with the stress of traveling through the warp. Marius waited there, the psyker who had replaced Joachim, looking pale and sick in the flickering light. He held his hands out toward me, psychic lightning already beginning to crackle between his fingers. This was how I would die. Not in glorious battle against the enemies of mankind, not defending innocence from corruption, but executed by my own allies for the crime of caring too much. The last thing I saw before Marius unleashed his power was Lyra standing in the corner watching with those empty eyes that reflected everything and felt nothing. She would be the last face I saw before death took me. The perfect servant, the ideal acolyte, everything I had failed to become. The psychic lightning hit me and the world dissolved into white-hot agony that had no end and no beginning, just eternal burning that consumed everything I was and everything I had ever been. The pain was beyond anything language could describe. It was not like being burned or cut or broken. It was like having your soul peeled away layer by layer while something forced you to remain conscious and aware through every impossible second of it. Marius's psychic power reached into my mind and began to tear, pulling at memories and thoughts and feelings with methodical precision. I screamed. The sound that came from my throat did not sound human. It was the noise an animal makes when caught in a trap. Pure agony stripped of anything resembling dignity or control. But the psycho-conditioning Mordecai had ordered for all his inner circle acolytes kicked in automatically. Far heavier than what most inquisitors bothered with. Even as Marius flayed my mind, even as he destroyed everything that made me who I was, the conditioning sealed away operational secrets behind barriers I could not break even if I wanted to. It was the cruelest irony imaginable. The training meant to protect me from chaos corruption now protected the Inquisition from my betrayal. I could not tell anyone what I had seen even if I wanted to. I could not expose Mordecai's crimes even as he executed me for refusing to participate in them. The chains they had wrapped around my mind ensured I would die loyal to an institution I had learned to hate. Marius pulled harder and I felt pieces of myself coming loose. Memories of my childhood on Secundus dissolved like smoke. The face of my mother, who had died when I was 12, faded until I could not remember if her eyes had been brown or blue. The names of friends from my PDF days vanished, leaving only empty spaces where connections had once been. Everything that had made me Curtis Voss was being systematically erased, burned away by psychic fire that left nothing but ash behind. Through the agony, I could hear voices. Mordecai stood near the entrance to the chamber, speaking to someone I could not see. His mechanical voice cut through the sound of my screaming with perfect clarity. "Make sure the other acolytes witness the final moments," he was saying. "I want them to understand what happens to those who allow weakness to compromise their service. Fear is a better teacher than faith for those who lack the strength to maintain both." So this was not just an execution, it was a lesson, a demonstration for Cale and the others who might one day think about questioning orders or showing mercy or remembering they were human. My death would serve as a warning that would echo through the Inquisition long after my name was forgotten. The flaying continued. Marius was thorough, working his way through my mind with the same methodical efficiency Lyra used to clean her weapons. He destroyed my training, my knowledge of Imperial tactics, my understanding of how the Inquisition operated. He burned away languages I had learned and skills I had developed. He even took the small things, the memory of how calf tasted in the morning or what rain sounded like on a metal roof or the feeling of genuine laughter. But he could not take everything. The psycho-conditioning prevented him from reaching the sealed chambers where operational data was stored, but it also created pockets of protection around certain core memories. The things that had made me question the Inquisition in the first place remained stubbornly intact. Father Gregorius praying as the bolt round entered his skull. The little girl with braided hair cut down as she ran. Valen's augmetics laid out on the recycling table. Joachim begging for help that would never come. These memories burned themselves deeper into my consciousness, even as everything else was stripped away. They became the last pieces of Curtis Voss that would exist anywhere in the universe. Not my name or my face or my voice, but the moments when I had finally understood what the Inquisition truly was. Marius pulled back suddenly, his psychic connection severing with a snap that left me gasping on the floor. Blood ran from my nose and ears. My vision had gone dark at the edges, my brain struggling to function after the assault it had endured. I could hear him speaking to Mordecai, but the words made no sense, just sounds without meaning. "The conditioning is too strong," Marius said, and his voice carried frustration that seemed strange coming from someone who had just been torturing me. "I cannot reach the operational data without killing him, and even then the information will die with him. The psycho-conditioning has sealed it beyond my ability to extract." "Then finish the execution," Mordecai replied coldly. "He has no further value to the Inquisition. Complete the flaying and dispose of the remains." I tried to speak, tried to force words through a throat that felt like it had been filled with broken glass. All that came out was a wet, gurgling sound that might have been laughter or crying or both at once. Even now, even at the moment of my death, the Inquisition's conditioning protected its secrets. I could not betray them even if my life depended on it. Marius raised his hands again, and I felt the psychic power building around him like pressure before a storm. This time he would not hold back. This time he would burn through everything, conditioning and all, until there was nothing left of my consciousness but a few neurons firing randomly in a brain too damaged to sustain life. The chamber door burst open before he could strike. An Arbeits officer stumbled inside, his face pale with panic. Inquisitor, he gasped. We have an emergency. The refugee convoy has risen in revolt. They have seized weapons from our armory and barricaded themselves in the cathedral. They are demanding to speak with you directly, or they will execute our personnel they have taken hostage. Mordecai turned toward the officer with the slow deliberation of a man who was never surprised by anything. How many hostages? He asked. 12, my lord. 8 Arbites and 4 of the medicus staff. The refugees claim they have evidence that our genetic screening was faulty, that we have been executing innocents based on miscalibrated equipment. They want accountability for the murders we have committed. The murders I had tried to expose, the data I had attempted to transmit to the planetary authorities. Somehow word had gotten out anyway, spreading through the refugee population until it sparked the very uprising Mordecai had claimed to be preventing. My failed act of rebellion had succeeded in ways I never could have imagined. Mordecai was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to the Arbites officer and delivered his orders with perfect mechanical calm. Prepare orbital bombardment coordinates for the cathedral and surrounding area. Radius of 2 kilometers. Complete sterilization protocols. Execute in 30 minutes. The officer's face went even paler. My lord, our personnel are still inside. If we bombard the cathedral, they will die alongside the refugees. Acceptable losses, Mordecai replied. The hostages knew the risks when they joined Imperial service. Their sacrifice will ensure the corruption does not spread. Besides, they have failed in their duty by allowing themselves to be captured. Death is a mercy compared to the punishment they would receive otherwise. He turned back to Marius and gestured at my broken form on the floor. Leave him for now. We have more immediate concerns. Secure him in the cell and we will complete the execution after the orbital strike. I want him to witness what his betrayal has caused before he dies. They dragged me back to the detention cell and threw me on the floor like a piece of refuse. My body would not respond to commands anymore. My legs would not hold my weight. My hands shook so badly I could not make a fist. The psychic flaying had damaged something fundamental in my nervous system, leaving me helpless as a newborn. I lay there and listened to the countdown. Announcements came through the ship's Vox system every 5 minutes. 25 minutes to bombardment, 20 minutes to bombardment, 15 minutes to bombardment. Each announcement was followed by updates about the refugee situation. They were still barricaded in the cathedral. They were still demanding justice for the innocents who had died. They still believed that someone in the Imperium would care enough to stop the madness. They were wrong. No one was coming to save them. No one was coming to hold Mordecai accountable for his crimes. The Inquisition answered to no authority except itself, and it had long ago decided that any amount of innocent blood was acceptable if it meant eliminating even the smallest chance of corruption spreading. At 10 minutes to bombardment, the door to my cell opened again. I expected Mordecai or Marius or Lyra coming to finish what they had started. Instead, it was Kale, the new acolyte who had replaced Valen. He knelt beside me and pressed something cold and metal into my shaking hand. My fingers closed around it automatically before my damaged brain could process what it was. A las pistol, fully charged, safety off. I watched them flay you, Kale whispered, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the thudding of my own heartbeat. I watched Mordecai order the execution of 12 loyal servants rather than negotiate with refugees who had legitimate grievances. I watched him plan the murder of 3,000 people to cover up the evidence of his mistakes. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked with something that might have been grief or rage or both. I joined the Inquisition because I believed in justice. But there is no justice here. There is only cruelty wearing the Emperor's face as a mask. He stood up and moved toward the door. The cell locks have malfunctioned. The guards have been called away to deal with the refugee crisis. You have perhaps 8 minutes before the bombardment begins. I do not know what you can do with that time. I do not know if you can do anything at all. But you deserve the choice that Valen and Joachim never got. Then he was gone, the cell door hanging open behind him. I lay on the floor and stared at the last pistol in my hand. 8 minutes, maybe less. The ship's vox crackled with another announcement. 7 minutes to bombardment. My body barely functioned. My mind was shattered. My training was gone. Everything that had made me a capable acolyte had been burned away by Marius's psychic assault. But somewhere in the wreckage of my consciousness, a single thought crystallized with perfect clarity. I could not stop the bombardment. I could not save the refugees or the hostages or anyone else Mordecai had marked for death. But I could bear witness. I could make sure that someone knew the truth about what happened here, even if that someone was only me in my final moments of life. I used the wall to pull myself upright, my legs trembling with the effort of supporting my weight. Each step toward the door felt like walking through deep water. My damaged nervous system struggling to coordinate movement that should have been automatic. The corridor outside was empty, just as Cale had promised. The guards had been pulled away to prepare for the orbital strike. 6 minutes to bombardment. I made my way through the ship's corridors with agonizing slowness, using the walls for support when my legs threatened to give out. Crew members passed me, but they were too focused on their own duties to pay attention to a broken acolyte stumbling through the halls. Everyone was preparing for the strike, checking coordinates and arming weapons and following the orders that would kill thousands of innocents in the name of protecting humanity from itself. 5 minutes to bombardment. I reached the observation deck where I had found Joachim on the night before Mordecai killed him. The viewport looked down on Salvation's End, showing the cathedral where the refugees had made their final stand. It was a beautiful building, all white stone and stained glass that caught the light of the setting sun. In a few minutes it would be a crater of molten rock and vaporized flesh. I pressed my palm against the viewport and whispered an apology that no one would ever hear. I had tried to save them. I had tried to expose the truth. But trying was not enough when facing an institution that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of crushing anyone who questioned its authority. 4 minutes to bombardment. The door opened behind me and Mordecai entered, flanked by Lyra and Marius. The Inquisitor moved with unhurried calm as if he had all the time in the world. He stopped a few meters away and tilted his skull mask as he studied my broken form. "I wondered if you would make it here," he said. "Young Cale's assistance was noted and will be addressed after we complete your execution. But I am actually pleased you chose to witness this moment. You should see the consequences of your betrayal, should understand the blood on your hands before you die." I turned to face him, the last pistol hanging loose in my grip. 3 Inquisitorial operatives against 1 shattered acolyte. The math was simple. I would die here in the next few seconds, my broken body joining the thousands of other corpses Mordecai had accumulated in his centuries of service. 3 minutes to bombardment. "This is not my betrayal," I said, forcing words through a throat that felt lined with broken glass. "This is yours. You were supposed to protect humanity from corruption. Instead, you have become the corruption. You murder the innocent and call it duty. You destroy the faithful and call it necessary. You have turned the Emperor's work into an abattoir where anyone can be sacrificed if it serves your paranoid delusions." "Eloquent," Mordecai replied, "but ultimately meaningless. The Inquisition exists because humanity cannot be trusted to police itself. We do what must be done so that the species can survive. Your soft heart condemns millions because you cannot accept the hard truths of existence. Better to save 1 guilty person than risk letting corruption spread. Better to kill 1,000 innocents than allow a single heretic to escape. This is the mathematics of survival. 2 minutes to bombardment." "Then your mathematics are wrong," I said, "because you have created more enemies than you have destroyed. Every innocent you kill creates a family that hates the Imperium. Every atrocity you commit drives people toward the very chaos you claim to fight. You are not protecting humanity. You are giving it every reason to embrace its destruction." Lyra raised her bolt pistol, the weapon aimed at my head with perfect mechanical precision. "Enough talk," she said. "The bombardment begins in less than 2 minutes. Let him watch what his weakness has wrought, then end this." I looked down at the cathedral one more time. I could see movement on the grounds, refugees, gathering in groups to pray or comfort each other or simply wait for death to arrive. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they were making a stand for justice. They thought someone in the vast machinery of the Imperium would hear their pleas and choose mercy over brutality. 1 minute to bombardment. I raised the last pistol Cale had given me, not toward Mordecai or Lyra or Marius, but toward the viewport itself. My hand shook so badly I could barely aim, but it did not matter. I was not trying for precision, I just needed to fire. The last beam struck the viewport and nothing happened. The armored glass was designed to withstand impacts from debris and weapons fire. A single last pistol shot could not even scratch it. But it did trigger the proximity alarms. Emergency klaxons blared through the observation deck. The bombardment sequence dropped into automatic hold, some ancient machine spirit protocol that even Mordecai could not override instantly. Safety systems locked the weapons until the breach could be assessed. Automated systems began sealing blast doors throughout the ship, isolating sections until the breach could be assessed. 30 seconds of delay, maybe a full minute if the tech priests were slow to override the alarms. It was not enough to stop the bombardment. It was not enough to save anyone. But it was something. It was a final act of defiance against the machine that had tried to grind my humanity into dust. Lyra's bolt round hit me in the chest before I could fire again. The explosive shell detonated inside my ribcage, turning organs into shrapnel and bone into fragments. I felt myself falling, my body toppling backward toward the viewport I had failed to break. Blood sprayed across the armored glass, painting it red like the stained glass windows of the cathedral below. The last thing I saw before my vision failed was Mordecai standing over me, his skull mask reflecting my broken face. "You have achieved nothing," he said. "The bombardment will proceed in 60 seconds. The refugees will die. The truth will be buried. And you will be forgotten as if you never existed. This is the only ending your weakness could have earned." He was right. In another minute, the cathedral would be destroyed and everyone inside would die. My rebellion had bought them 60 seconds of life. 60 seconds to pray or cry or hold the people they loved. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But as the darkness closed in around me, I felt something that might have been peace. I had made a choice. I had remained human even when everything tried to take that humanity away. I had refused to become the weapon they wanted me to be. And in refusing, I had proven that the Inquisition's power was not absolute, that even their most powerful conditioning could not completely destroy the part of a person that cared about right and wrong. My last thought was of Father Gregorius, of the old priest who had kept praying even as the bolt round entered his skull. He had believed until the very end that the Emperor would deliver him. I did not share his faith anymore. But I understood now what had kept him praying. It was not hope of rescue. It was the simple human need to die as yourself rather than as what others tried to make you become. The darkness took me and I was gone. The official Inquisitorial report filed 2 days later stated that Acolyte Curtis Voss had been corrupted by exposure to Genestealer cult propaganda and executed for heresy. The refugee uprising on Salvation's End was suppressed through orbital bombardment after negotiations proved impossible. Casualties totaled 3,214 refugees and 12 Imperial personnel held hostage. No evidence of actual Genestealer infection was found among the dead, though Inquisitor Mordecai noted this was likely due to the thoroughness of the orbital strike in eliminating all biological evidence. The report was filed in the data archives where it would gather digital dust alongside millions of other records of Inquisitorial operations. No one would ever read it. No one would question the numbers or ask why so many people died. The Imperium would continue grinding forward with its endless wars and its brutal mathematics of survival. But in the deep data vaults of the Eternal Vigilance, hidden beneath layers of encryption and buried in files marked for deletion, a single message remained. Kale had copied my attempted transmission before destroying the evidence of his assistance. He had added his own testimony about what he witnessed during my execution and the bombardment that followed. Then he had hidden it where someone might someday find it, a record of what the Inquisition had become and the price paid by those who refused to participate in its crimes. The message ended with a single line that carried more truth than any official report. They told us we would hunt heretics. They did not tell us we would become them. In the grim darkness of the far future where there is only war, that message waited in the shadows. A small act of rebellion preserved in data crystal and hope. A reminder that even in the most brutal institutions, even under the most complete systems of control, some spark of humanity could survive long enough to bear witness to the truth. It was not enough to change anything, but it was something. And sometimes in the endless night of the 41st millennium, something was all anyone could hope for.